morning, my name is Éirí Amach and you're very welcome to Féile and Phobail's virtual United Irishman Tour 2020. Today we're going to look at various buildings associated with the United Irishmen, and I hope to give you a short insight into the history of how the United Irishmen influenced politics within Ireland over the 18th century. Today we're standing at St George's Church, which is very significant in the history of the United Irishmen. St George's Church was built in 1618, knocked down and totally re-renovated in the 1800s. Why is it significant? It's significant because one of the leaders of the United Irishmen, Henry Joy McCracken, was initially buried here after his execution in Cornmarket, which we will visit in a few moments. Also, a gentleman called Edward Bunting, who was a friend of Mary Ann McCracken, sister of Henry Joy. Edward Bunting and Mary Ann McCracken were very significant in the formation of the Ulster Harp Festival in 1792. Bunting lodged with the McCracken family up the street here in High Street, and also Bunting was the main organist and harpist here in the St George's Church. St George's Church is also significant in that it was one of the first churches here in Belfast. Where we are standing is underneath us is where the two rivers which Belfast is built upon, the River Farset and the River Lagan, they have come together and they meet here. Hence Belfast getting its name of Belfarstia, which is mouth of the sandy bank. St George's Church also is significant in the history of Ireland, and more so of Belfast, in that King William, on his way through to the Battle of the Boyne, worshipped here, and the famous speech of Hail thee O King was given here before William went on to the Boyne. Also significant as well is that the pulpit that was here during the renovations was donated to St Mary's Roman Catholic Church, and to this day it is still there. Back again quickly to King William, the chair that King William sat on during the famous speech is still here within the church. Before we get into the actual detail of the United Irishmen, it is important that we look back and we look at what life was like in Ireland during that period. Ireland was of two societies. You were either rich or you were poor. The rich people looked after one another, and the poor people tried to make a living off the land. Based on the back of that, and after 1694, another rebellion, England then introduced what is only known as Draconian Laws, and as we know them here now, the penal laws. Examples of the penal laws were the penal laws applied to Catholics and Presbyterians alike. Examples of the penal laws were, if you were a Catholic, you were not allowed to own a horse over the value of £5. You could not possess a firearm. You could not vote. You could not own a house. Presbyterians were also subject to this type of law. So that's a slight introduction to the background. A lot of people don't know that, but then in 1740 there was a famine that hit Ireland. Ireland was hit in 1740 by severe frost and weather, which devastated all the crops. As they were recovering in 1741, they were hit with another batch of really bad weather, which again devastated the crops, the barley, the potatoes, etc. And at that first famine, what had happened was the poor got poorer and they starved, and it was estimated out of a population of 2.5 million at that time, 450,000 people perished. So with that background then, the United Irishmen, or before they were formed, people were starting to say, well, these laws, they are draconian, they are not helping the people of Ireland, and something has to be done about it. Okay. Fast forward then to 1760, Wolfe Tone, who's one of the founder members of the United Irishmen, was a thorn in the side of the British government. The British government didn't like him because he produced a paper about Catholic emancipation, etc., and they were very wary of him. Tone was a respected person, and Tone had went to France, and France plays a significant part in rebellions within Ireland. Tone then went to France and asked for assistance in helping form a rebellion. In 1760, a French fleet arrived with 109,000 troops to take part in a rebellion. Unfortunately, the rebellion failed, and why did it fail? It never even took part because the French fleet were devastated with bad weather. Then we go down forward to 1791 when the United Irishmen were formed. United Irishmen were formed here in Belfast in a little tavern called Peggy Bartley's Tavern. Present at that meeting were Henry Joy McCracken, Samuel Neeson, William Drennan, Wolfe Tone, plus a number of other, William Orr, and a number of other notable people. From that, it started off, United Irishmen, believe it or not, started off as a debating society. With this debating society then, they thought through political means that they could get reform introduced into Ireland. Unfortunately, Ireland, being the way it was, this did not happen. 1794, United Irishmen were banned by the British. In 1795, the Orange Order was formed, and the Orange Order performed lots of atrocities. With this, there was an organisation called the Catholic Defenders, and the Catholic Defenders were formed to protect Catholic people. As the talk of the rebellion of a United Irishmen, the Catholic Defenders started to join United Irishmen. Wolfe Tone then formed the Society of United Irishmen in November of 1791. The idea behind this, they were formed as in the committees, and each committee then had their own leaders, their generals, lieutenants, etc. And this was the formation of United Irishmen to lead towards rebellion. During that period, an interesting fact was that Guinness moved to St James's Gate in 1758, and Arthur Guinness bought the lease of the land for 9,000 years for £45 a year. Why do I mention Guinness? Because during the 1790s, whenever the United Irishmen started to become radical and ask for reforms and that, Guinness did not like this. Sir Arthur Guinness did not, and he was opposed to the United Irishmen. The reason being was that he was a unionist and he saw them as a threat to the union. During that time, there was a suggestion that Guinness, albeit the selling point at that time that Guinness is good for you and it was good for your blood and your iron and that there was to be a boycott of Guinness. As we all know, Guinness is black, so it was called a black Protestant beer. In 1760, we had another French invasion. Only this time, the French invasion came in the north part of Ireland, and it came to Carrickfergus. A French general called Francois Trudeau sailed in to Belfast Lough and captured Carrickfergus Castle. They stayed in Carrickfergus, and what happened was then they replenished all their stores, etc., and they raided one of the Orange Lodges. The British then got wind of what he was doing, and as his ships sailed back out of Belfast Lough, they were ambushed and attacked, and they were massacred. Trudeau is buried actually on the Mull of Kintyre. He was given full military honours by a Scottish lord. So there was the French, United Irishmen and the French coming together again in another failed rebellion. One significant thing as you research and go through the history of the United Irishmen, as a lot of rebellions, they were riddled with informers. People were prepared to sell their souls for 30 pieces of silver. If you were of the same political persuasion as a United Irishman, you had to take an oath of allegiance. So I'm going to quote the oath that the United Irishmen took, and it goes: "In the awful presence of God, I, Éirí Amach, do voluntarily declare that I will preserve and endeavouring to form a brotherhood of affection among Irishmen of every religion, persuasion, and that I will also preserve and endeavouring to obtain equal, full and adequate representation of all the people of Ireland. I do further declare that neither hopes, fears, rewards or punishments shall ever induce me, directly or indirectly, to inform on or give evidence against any member or members of this or similar societies for the act of expression of theirs, done made collectively or individually in and out of this society in the pursuance of spirit of this obligation. That was the oath you took as you became a United Irishman. It's ironic, as I just said earlier on, that you were not to tell on anybody, and United Irishmen were riddled with informers. And I'll speak in a wee second about one of the most famous informers ever in Irish history. So who were these United Irishmen? I've picked a random sample of United Irishmen, and one of the main reasons were I'm a Gaelic man, and a number of prominent Gaelic clubs throughout Ireland are called after United Irishmen. Thomas Russell was one of the famous United Irishmen. Thomas Russell, there is a great poem about him. Thomas Russell was known as the man from God knows where. And I would recommend anyone to go onto YouTube and look at Phil Coulter's rendition of the man from God knows where. Another gentleman was a man called Jeremiah Hope. Hope was captured along with Henry Joy McCracken in the Belfast Hills, or Divis Hills as they were known then. Hope managed to escape, and Hope then escaped to Dublin and was on the run. And Hope finally gave up after the failed rebellion of 1803 with Robert Emmet. Michael Dwyer is really a great character. Michael Dwyer joined United Irishmen and fought a guerrilla warfare in and around the Dublin Hills and Wexford. Dwyer then emigrated to Australia on free passage and was given land in Australia. Dwyer, being an Irishman have a history of liking a drop of beer. Dwyer became police chief in Australia, one of the police chiefs of one of the provinces in Australia, and unfortunately lost it all through drink that he gave away papers. Such was Dwyer's popularity that there was an uproar about this, and Dwyer was then reinstated. And Dwyer died in Australia. In 2002 there was a Dwyer reunion of people of the name of Dwyer throughout the world, and in 2002 there was a new monument erected to Michael Dwyer in Australia. This guy I'm going to talk about is a guy called Leonard Mcnally. Not widely known, but when you do your research into United Irishmen, Leonard Mcnally was the biggest informer in Irish history. Mcnally was a British spy, but was also a United Irishman. The ironic thing about Mcnally is Mcnally was also a poet, and had written some prominent poems and books. But Mcnally, when he was working with United Irishmen, Mcnally was spying on them as well. And believe it or not, Mcnally was the barrister who defended some of the United Irishmen in their trials. And as you can guess, they didn't. They were all found guilty. So Mcnally takes a unique place in the history of United Irishmen, as he was one of the first really known big informers. Some of Mcnally's real clients were Nobber Tandy, Wolf Tone, etc. Those were the guys who Mcnally defended, and as you know, the outcome of those people. William Moore is legendary within the ranks of United Irishmen. William Moore was captured by the state forces, but what happened with William Moore was his trial. It was a judicial trial, and there was so much public outcry about Orr that the people refused to attend his execution. Orr was executed in Carrickfergus, and the people of Carrickfergus did not go. In those days, people would have went to a public execution as a day out. The United Irishmen, before they went into battle in 1798, their rallying cry was "Remember Orr." Thomas McCabe, I spoke about Thomas McCabe. McCabe was the founder member of the United Irishmen, and McCabe is synonymous with the stopping of slavery here in Belfast. Theobald Wolfe Tone, one of the founder members and one of the people present at the initial meeting of United Irishmen here in Belfast. Tone then went on to Dublin in November and founded the All-Ireland United Irishman Society, for want of better words. Tone was a very influential person. He was widely known to the British. He went to Dublin he went to France and organised and got promises from the French people that they would help in a rebellion. During that time we had the 7-Year War, which the British were engaged with, and that was seen as an opportunity for people in Ireland to rebel. Wolfe Tone then sailed into, as part of the French fleet, sailed into Buncrana in 1798. Wolfe Tone is the last of the United Irishmen to die. You see portraits and pictures of Wolfe Tone, and the uniform that Wolfe Tone is wearing is that of a general of the French army. Tone, upon his capture, was taken to jail in Dublin, and for fearing of reprisals and what was going to happen to him, Wolfe Tone is allegedly taken his own life. Tone is buried in Bodenstown in County Kildare, and Bodenstown, then there is an annual commemoration to Bodenstown each year to the memory of Wolfe Tone. When we look at the United Irishmen, we have to ask the question, what else drove United Irishmen to take part in rebellion? United Irishmen drew inspiration from two revolutions, the American Revolution in 1795 and the French Revolution in 1789. And from that they saw that there was a change in the world and a change in Europe, and the inspiration was, if they can do it, we can do it. Speaking of the American Revolution, I want to speak about a man who is an honorary United Irishman. It's a gentleman called Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine wrote the book, The Rights of Man. But in that book, there is one significant sentence which comes out, and I'll quote it to you. What is that in your hand? It is a branch of what? Of the tree of liberty. Where did it first grow? In America. Where did it bloom? In France. Where did the seed fall? In Ireland. Meaning that the inspiration and that the seed from it came down to the United Irishmen starting a rebellion in 1798. Here we are outside the old assembly rooms. The significance of this building is that it's the building where Henry Joy McCracken was tried. This building was taken over after the 1798 rebellion to be used as a courthouse to try dissenters and United Irishmen. Another significant part of this building is that it is used as a cornerstone and a milestone to measure distance to every part of the north of Ireland. If you look up to my left here on the left hand side, there is a building at number 25 Donegal Street. The significance of that another United Irishman, William Drennan, helped co-found, along with Éirí Amach, the first maternity hospital in Belfast. Okay, United Irishmen first met in Belfast in Peggy Bartley's Tavern. Peggy Bartley's Tavern is no more, as it was destroyed during the Blitz in the 1941. And behind me there is the remnants of where Peggy's Bartley Tavern was. Here we are, a hidden gem in relation to United Irishmen. Not an awful lot of people know about these four portraits here in Belfast. If you look at the portraits, the first portrait is one of Henry Joy McCracken and Mary Ann just before his execution, as he was led up to the gallows. The second portrait shows Thomas Russell, United Irishman, Edward Bunting, who we spoke about, who was the organist and the chief choir person down in St George's Church, and Mary Ann McCracken organising and planning the Ulster Folk Festival. The third portrait is Thomas Russell reading the newspaper, the Northern Star, which was the newspaper associated with the United Irishmen. And the last portrait behind me here is of the Muddlers Club. United Irishmen were all members of the famous Muddlers Club. If you come to Belfast now and in modern day, you can go to the Muddlers Club, which is a very nice restaurant up at the corner. Okay, here we are at Rosemary Street First Presbyterian Church. The significance of this church is this is where William Drennan worshipped. William Drennan's father was the rector of this church. Also a number of other well-known and founder members of the United Irishmen worshipped in this church. This church is very, very significant that it is Rosemary Street First Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterians in and around that time were increasing, and there were three Presbyterian churches built in this vicinity. The first one is obviously here, the second one was across the way, and the third one was back towards the Masonic Hall. Unfortunately, the other two churches aren't here. As you can see, the Presbyterians had a significant role to play within the life of Belfast. This Presbyterian church is very, very significant in that a large number of well-known people, business people in Belfast also worshipped here. You have the likes of Harland and Wolfe also worshipped in this church. On the blue plaque there, Sir Samuel Davison, the man who founded the famous Sirocco Works, also worshipped in this church. Speak a little bit about William Drennan. William Drennan obviously was the founder of United Irishmen, but not only was he a radical, he was a physician of great renown. William Drennan also helped find a vaccination for smallpox. William Drennan also founded the first maternity hospital here. And a significant thing about William Drennan was at William Drennan's funeral, he insisted on his will that his coffin be carried by an equal number of Catholics and an equal number of Protestants, not just from any part of society, but from the poor. And the 12 pallbearers, 6 Catholics and 6 Protestants, were each given a guinea after he was interned in Clifton Street Cemetery. Also of significance here is a man called Thomas McCabe. Thomas McCabe was a businessman here in Belfast, but Thomas McCabe, a United Irishman, his claim to fame is that he stopped slavery coming to Belfast. Bristol and London were the stop-off ports for slavery coming from the West Indies, etc. In Africa. So what happened then was the businessmen at that time decided that this Belfast was a last good port to stop before they exported the slaves on to the Americas. McCabe got wind of it and burst into a business meeting one night and warned that if one slave was to come in to Belfast, there would be serious repercussions. The businessmen, knowing McCabe's background, etc., took heed of him, and slavery was prevented from coming to Belfast. McCabe also is buried in Clifton Street Cemetery. Here we are in Wine Cellar Entry. The significance of Wine Cellar Entry is that there's a pub down here called White's Tavern. And if you're to believe this, it is alleged that after Henry Joy McCracken was tried across the way at the Exchange buildings, the yeoman brought him here for him to have his last drink before he was taken to the gallows in Cornmarket. Here we are at the place where Henry Joy McCracken was executed. If you can remember, we showed you at the start where he was tried in Exchange buildings. McCracken was then allegedly taken for his last drink, brought here. From the photographs you saw where McCracken was led to the gallows, and then he was interred at St George's Church. The significance of this is that this was inside the castle walls back in the day. The old Belfast Castle was still here, and therefore it was there was no opportunity for anyone to attempt to rescue him. Although when McCracken was cut down, they did try to revive him, unfortunately with little success, and he was interred down in St George's Church. Here we are at one of Belfast's famous landmarks. It's a pub called the Jailhouse, formerly known as McCracken's. Behind me here we have a statue of the famous United Irishman, Henry Joy McCracken. McCracken was one of the founder members of United Irishmen. United Irishmen's emblem was a harp on a green background, and if you look and you can see on McCracken's uniform, he has the harp there. McCracken was Commander-in-Chief of United Irishmen during the 1798 rebellion. Initially, the rebellion was a success in and around Antrim and Randallstown, but were then defeated and outnumbered by the British yeomanry. McCracken, along with another famous United Irishman, Jeremiah Hope, escaped. Unfortunately for McCracken, McCracken was betrayed by one of his own and was captured. McCracken was then held and brought to Exchange building in Donegal Street, where he was tried for treason. He was given the option of give us the names of your co-conspirators and we will spare you. McCracken refused to do so. Therefore, on the 17th of July 1798, Cracken was taken to Cornmarket, where he was executed. Cracken was then interred in St George's Church for the first time, and then reinterred in Clifton Street Cemetery. Here we are at the final part of our tour. We're in Clifton Street Cemetery, which is just up off Carlisle Circus. Clifton Street Cemetery was built in 1797. Clifton Street Cemetery is synonymous as the last resting place of a number of United Irishmen. We're standing here at the grave of Henry Joy McCracken, who was originally interred in St George's Church and was then reinterred back here later on after there was a major flood down at St George's Church. He is interred along with his sister Mary Ann McCracken. Mary Ann, as we mentioned before, Mary Ann was a great advocate of United Irishmen, and herself and Edward Bunting, who was the original choirmaster and organist down in St George's Church, helped found the Ulster Harp Festival. Other notable United Irishmen buried here were William Drennan, who we spoke about before when we were down at Rosemary Street Presbyterian Church, and Thomas McCabe, another founder member of United Irishmen. As you can remember from the initial part of the tour, McCabe was one of the people who were instigating to make sure that slavery was not brought to Belfast. Clifton Street Cemetery is also synonymous with a number of great people who brought life to Belfast. Dunville, the famous whiskey people, is buried here, and if you're in the west of the city, you will see the Dunville Park just beside the Royal Victoria Hospital. Dunville created that park for his workers. Well folks, as we near the end of the tour, you have to ask yourself the question, what was the impact of the 1798 rebellion on the United Irishmen? Was it a success? Was it a failure? Opinions will differ. But one thing of fact is that the rebellion of 1798 brought Ireland and England closer together, and we've seen that in the 1801 Act of Union, which was there. People will have different opinions as to whether it was a success or not. To this modern day, people are still divided as to whether it was a success or a failure. Modern day people and Republicans draw inspiration from the United Irishmen. Other people say, no, it was a total failure. I leave that to yourself. Well folks, as they say in the Irish language, chun, that's it. I hope you have enjoyed this virtual tour of United Irishmen, and has given you an insight into the background and to the makeup of the personalities of the men who started United Irishmen and started the 1798 rebellion.